With me now from the Daily Signal, Jarrett Stepman. Jarrett, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see you, too. Thank you very much.
All right, Jarrett, this is one of your specialties. You talk about this in your book. Talk to us about this. What is the history of the Black Hills, the change in power and who controlled the land? What was really going on before Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, it is really interesting. Of course, these arguments about, take back the land, so to speak, are very common now in American discussions. But of course, the Sioux tribes, which have been at the heart of this, saying that the land is actually theirs, that we should give it back, so to speak, were actually somewhat recent arrivals into the area when the United States arrived. In fact, they had taken the land in the Black Hills from the Cheyenne Indians who had been there up until really the late 18th century. And of course, they had taken from other tribes, the Crow, the Kiowa, and many others that had occupied that land before. So to a certain extent, the Sioux had actually only been there. Really, they had been there for a shorter amount of time. The United States has currently owned that land in the Black Hills. So this idea that this is simply a permanent part of Sioux culture is just not true. The tribe actually originated elsewhere, farther east, and had been pushed by the Iroquois Confederacy, which had pushed them out off the East Coast. So this idea that this has simply always been, that the Sioux have always been in the spot and that the United States came and unfairly took the land, I think is really, it does not give due justice to the longer history of this region, and I think is used now as an argument to say that the Mount Rushmore shouldn't be there, that the Black Hills are simply unfairly stolen, which I think, again, it undermines the actual history of the territory.
Right, and my husband has a favorite saying whenever he and I discuss world history, and that is the history of the world, not just the United States, but the history of the world is one of conquest and war. And it's a very cynical statement, but historically it's not incorrect. And it applies to the United States even when we were, the colonies, even when we had settled here. This isn't just pre-United States or pre-colonies. That was happening here on our land up until just a couple hundred years ago, and the area around Mount Rushmore is no different. The left does ignore this.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think there were certainly some mistakes that were made, and anybody seen the Deadwood series on HBO knows that the history of the Black Hills is complicated, especially after gold was discovered there, many squatters there. The United States government tried to give money back to the Sioux to pay for the fact that some of the land had been taken. It actually ended up in a 1980 Supreme Court case where the U.S. government awarded the Sioux tribes $100 million that were not claimed because they said that they wanted all the land that existed there. But at the same time, are the Sioux going to award the Cheyenne who had been moved out of there? Are they going to award an indemnity to those people who had had their land taken away? The United States system is a very legal and law-based system, one based on private property and rights and things like this. We have a court system that deals with these kind of conflicts. The history of the world generally is might makes right. You simply go in, you conquer, you take, you enslave. That's it. That has been most of human history. Our history is one that's a very legal-based system. It's about the rule of law. And yes, even when those mistakes are made, we have a system that can correct those mistakes. We have a legal system that ultimately protects people's rights in this country. And I think that's an important part of this larger message. The left doesn't want to tell that longer history of deprivations of all humankind, not just from Americans, but from people all over the globe. I think that is what the crux of human history is. The United States has been the country that has corrected many of those wrongs because of the very system that was created by the Founding Fathers, by 1776.
Right. I think you're exactly right. And the left it's not that they're making a mistake. They make a specific choice to focus only on the errors, the mistakes, or the wrongs that have happened in the course of United States history. Of course, there are going to be errors, mistakes, and wrongs because this is a nation it is a nation of laws, but it's governed by men. Men are inherently sinful people. I'm talking about mankind, not just the gender of man. Men are inherently sinful. There are going to be wrongs and sins and errors, and you're absolutely right to point out that the correction of those, a system that not only allows but encourages and enforces the correction of those errors, that's what sets us apart from the rest of the world. And that brings me to my next question. When the left does revise history, when they focus only on things that have gone wrong or less ideal circumstances, or they try to smudge the truth to make it fit their political narrative, what do they want as a result of this premise? What are they trying to achieve when they say 4th of July celebration at Mount Rushmore glorifies white supremacy? What's their end goal here?
They want to scrub and brush out anything that competes with their narratives. And I think that means also modern political narratives. I mean, this is a political movement. This is not just some discussion about history. It's a discussion about how American society should be structured. It's about, is Western civilization inherently good or is it evil? Does it need to be toppled? I think part of this kind of attack on history, the attack on statues, is part of their overall attempt to silence any and all opposition. I think this is really what it's about. They don't want there to be anybody who could possibly question their narratives about a whole wide range of topics, from discussions about transgenderism or discussions about racism in America. All these things must go through their lens, and you must simply accept their truths, not the truth. And I think that's really what's driving this movement, why the past needs to be overturned, why Americans simply can't understand history as it is, which is very complicated. And I think the idea of scrubbing the past to make sure that everything perfectly fits our notions of what's right today makes a mockery of what past really is. And I think to a certain extent, we need to look back and see the failings of those who came before us, which informs us how we today can do things differently than they did. It helps us inform us and how we're going to go forward. That's been part of the genius of this country. If you're simply going through and scrubbing the past and making sure it conforms to modern views, you'll have a very shallow understanding of the world. And I think it leaves us very little prepared for a crisis in the future.
Well, I think that might be the point, that by painting over history, by revising history to fit their narrative, they are trying to make sure that people think of the United States only in a certain way, think of the United States as racist, think of it as stolen, which makes the United States seem delegitimate or illegitimate, so that they feel that they are justified and have the support of people to remake the United States in the image that they want it to be, which we know is not freedom and liberty and justice for all. We know is Marxism. This is where they start. Jarrett, thank you for your analysis. I appreciate it.